Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Timeless Podcast. I'm once again joined by my co-host Greaseball, and there's been a couple of interesting going on in the Timeless format right now. It's been getting a lot of interest with the potential Arena Championship coming up, so there's been a lot of new people interested in the format and a lot of cool things happening.
Yeah, so we want to give a shout out to the budget decklist project that's going on right now. Timeless has been growing a lot lately with the AC announcement, and then also there are kind of some dead formats on Arena, and a lot of people have been coming in and asking what kind of lists that they can craft or what's playable. I don't have enough wildcards for this or that, and so a few people in the Discord have been basically creating new Arena accounts and getting the wildcards from that and seeing what kind of decks that they can build in Timeless. And I think like one of the current constraints they're working with was 20 rares and 4 mythics for building decks. And the goal of this was that the decks you build are playable and they feel good, or they feel good enough. And all of the wildcards that you spend on them exist in playable tiered decks of their like fully built versions, right? So it's really neat, and they even are telling you like which fetches the craft, which is they're really putting a lot of thought into it. And it's a really cool project. I think they already have a like a budget tempo build and a budget Boros energy build, and it's just a really neat project. And I think it kind of makes sense that as Timeless is getting a bit bigger to have a project like this going on. So it's a really cool project, the budget decklist project that's been going on in the Discord right now.
Yeah, a lot of people have been contributing diligently. If you want to help out, feel free to chip in Discord. It's really cool because they're like trying to make it a very like discrete series of actions you could follow to get into Timeless, such as start by crafting your shocks and fetches and Guide of Souls for energy, and Ocelot Pride with your 4 mythics. Put literal Soul Sisters into your deck for the time being. Sorts to Plowshares and cards like that are uncommons now, thankfully. And then provide a literal list of the cards that you can slowly craft to get into actual Mardu energy. So that project's awesome and definitely deserved the shout out.
Yeah, and then we also had a tournament this past weekend. If you want
Yeah,
to
we
look
had
at
a
that.
tournament, and I have the results up on screen, the detailed text results. The top eight was super diverse this time, which is awesome. We had 3 mid-range decks, 2 tempo decks, an aggro deck, and 2 combo decks, being 2 completely different combo decks, actually taking up the top eight. And just to break it down a little bit further, it was Mardu Energy, 3 variants of the Golgari midrange, 2 Psychic Frog variants, and then the 2 combo decks, which were quite different from each other, is of course Show and Tell, Sultai Show and Tell being one of them. And most notably, Sorin Necrostorm, which is what we wanted to talk about a lot today, right?
Yeah, Sorin Necrostorm. I think we're gonna start trying to call it Sorin Storm, aka the Muxus deck, as it's known by a lot of Timeless players. Piloted by Mr. Muxus himself. It was really cool to see that take down a tournament. I think we talked about Necropiles being able to just randomly take down tournaments, and this is another weekend of it, right?
Yeah, it's not the first time that like a random Necropile has come sort of out of nowhere and taken over the tournament. Of course, to like us who have had our ears to the ground, this Necropile didn't come out of nowhere. It had a great result at the metagame challenge, and then like in Discord for like the last month or two, it was like the new hotness. But to a lot of outside people, this might seem sudden, and it happened like at the previous 1K where Mononoke came out of nowhere with a Necrostorm build, a similar deck, not leveraging Sorin Alenda, but leveraging even more dedicated Storm cards, and crushed it very unexpectedly. So these sorts of decks always pop up from time to time, and with a good pilot, they can put up some pretty crazy results.
And Mistman on
Oh
Shadow
yeah.
Shadow Sacrifice Belcher, right?
Mistman on the
It's
Belcher, that was his own build of it too. Like that is different from the
yeah.
established Belcher list. And then even before that, we had Tommy won 2 tournaments in a row playing Belcher, which is another combo deck that, in the hands of a good pilot, can punch way above its weight.
Yeah, and yeah, I think if you look at pretty much they've taken the majority of the tournaments at this point, right?
I
At
don't
this
know
point, I
about
think
a
it's like
full majority, but it's the most out of
yeah,
any
it's
archetype, more than energy and more than show and tell,
okay.
I would say.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, yeah. Um, yeah, and then just notably, there were two green black decks in the top eight again, and I think in our previous tournament we had three green black decks in the top eight. That's probably one of the most underplayed decks in terms of results. But yeah, it still seems really good and still seems really well positioned, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
I
I don't
totally
know how many
agree.
tournaments where it's gonna have multiple top eights in before we more people start playing it, right? I mean, it was because it just did really well across the board too. I think it somehow went like 5-0 or 6-0 against Tempo too. Like it had a very very good showing.
Yeah, this deck is very strong. Like in my opinion, it's the best fair deck in the format right now. It is definitely at this point superseded energy as the best fair deck in the format. We've had enough time to test energy against this, and it gets to leverage a lot of powerful interactive things in the format right now. Strip Mine is uncounterable interaction in the format right now, and it's very good against combo, and it's very good against the fair blue decks. They also get access to Grief, which, once again, great against combo, great against fair blue decks. And they also get the mid-range heavy hitters that give them the fast clock and the ability to outvalue energy. So I think this shell is very, very, very well positioned. And the list isn't even fully figured out because in the top 8, in addition to 2 Golgari versions, there was a mono black version of the list. And it's still questionable what threats you play in the deck because it got a lot of new ones. It got Douthy Voidwalker and Opposition Agent as S tier threats, but the thing is, you cannot fit in Voidwalker, Opposition Agent, Orcish Bowmasters, Barrogoyf, the One Ring, and Shieldred, and Deathrite Shaman, and Troll Reanimate. You can't fit 4 copies of all of those, plus interaction into your deck, right? So concessions have to be made somewhere, and it's absolutely not decided what goes in the list. I didn't even name Weary's Own Guard in that list. That's how many good cards they have to fit in the deck.
Yeah, and it's also playing Dark Ritual. Notably, all the decks in the top 8, I think, touch black.
Yeah.
Um, Black has been the best color in Timeless for a while. Still seems to be the case. Um, and with kind of that in mind, I think we kind of decided that this is a good episode to kind of start talking about the history of Dark Ritual and Necro in the format, and yeah, and also kind of celebrate Muxus' win a little bit this past weekend on a sweet brew that is now a tiered deck.
Yeah, it's awesome to see like whenever something like slowly moves up from brew status to tier deck status. Even though Necropotence Storm has come up like so many times in Timeless's history, like it was one of the first unique to Timeless really busted decks that got developed over a year ago. It's always the kind of deck that will eventually fall out just because it's very difficult to pilot and it doesn't see such a high percentage on ladder. And then if it gets too good for tournaments, people are just going to run the things that will counter it, and it will always show up again as a dark horse after some amount of time passes.
Yeah, and it's also like pretty. Yeah, it's pretty. Well, it's difficult to pilot, and it's like it can be kind of exhausting. There are a lot of decisions that you repeatedly have to make throughout a set, even in your easier matchups. And also notably, just kind of in the history, I think we haven't. A lot of the usually what happens is like someone will make this deck and then a handful of people will play it and no one else will touch it because there were like a lot of people that didn't want to craft the mythics for Necro or they just didn't want to play Necro. There were a lot of like Necro just non-believers that say I don't like Necro the card, I don't want to touch it. Um, and I think this is kind of one of the first times that I think we've like had a good what like we just had like a good like with more people joining the format. There are actually like a lot more people willing to play Necro, which is like really cool. At least
Yeah,
I think so. Some people think it's awful, right?
yeah. There's a lot of fresh faces in the format right now, and a lot of them are seeing these Necro decks and being attracted to them. Like Muxus was a guy who I didn't even know who he was 2, 3 months ago. He just showed up one day, was piloting show and tell at a very high rank, and then he's like, okay, this is my Dark Ritual deck. I think this is great, and kept working on it. And then at Metagame Challenge weekend, we had this guy Kobe show up out of nowhere. I'd never seen him before, never spoken to him, and he's like, I got 5 trophies with this. And we're all like, what's
Yeah.
going on? This new generation of Necro players is going crazy. And a bunch of people that have been exposed to the format with the Arena Championship are seeing this as one of the most clearly busted things you could do in the format. Like obviously casting show and tell on turn 2 is also going to win games, but this just feels ridiculously unfair and consistent sometimes.
Yeah, and all these, all these Magic pros, they understand the power of Necropotence historically, right? Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so
it's one of the
it's really cool to
most
see.
infamous cards of all time, quite literally. And it's one of those cards where when you look at Timeless and you say, "Wow, I'm shocked that this thing has not eaten a ban yet." Even though most Timeless players don't clamor for bans, it is sometimes interesting to look back, and the Wizards employees have said this themselves actually. I remember reading a Reddit comment by one of them, and they said, "Oh, when we added Grief to the format, or maybe it was Dark Ritual, it was one of those two. They said they were pretty sure it would have to go because like Grief, Necro, Dark Ritual in one deck, not good, but it actually ended up just being another playable part of the Timeless ecosystem and not overpowering at all."
Yeah, and I think definitely Dark Ritual was the boogeyman most hated card in the format for like several months, I think.
Yeah,
But I
it has gotten, because it's been playable in all sorts of things, Dark Ritual, as opposed to some of the other cards that people clamor about, like Show and Tell, where you have to build a dedicated Show and Tell deck. As we saw at the tournament, Dark Ritual is actually starting to show up a lot. It's showing up in the combo decks, it's showing up in the fair lists. It doesn't go in every single deck. We mentioned 8 decks leveraging black. I think only 4 of those 8s were leveraging Dark Ritual. So it's not getting to dangerous territory, but like you said, it's been a format boogeyman for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, so like I think historically, if you look at like how Necro is played in this format, right? Uh, for Necropotence, you start your deck, you start building your Necro deck. For Necropotence, for Dark Ritual. There's no, it's the best card. I mean, it's the best card to get out your Necro early, and it's also the best card that once you are Necroing, it lets you empty out your hand and cast the rest of your spells, right? So you're gonna see in all these lists for Ritual, for Necro, it's a no-brainer. That's what you're starting your list with.
Yep, and nowadays we have a lot more tools to reach on, but I think we want to start by walking back in time and timeless, back to when we didn't have the extra
Yeah.
tools to work with. So this deck that
Yeah.
I just pulled up now is one of the oldest screenshots of a Necro deck that I could find. This is the original Necro Storm, which is from way before Modern Horizons. It was a pretty niche ladder deck that would show up from time to time, and there were a couple of crazy pilots. I know Spallet was a notable crazy pilot of this deck list that he got rank 1 with it. Like, he finished a season rank 1, which is crazy impressive. I think Omrithopter made a video on it as well. This screenshot you could see with the drawing on it, that's direct from Spallet. I went to find this in old Discord messages, and this was the arrows meant something. The annotation to this was half in English, half in Russian. This is a real crazy deck.
Yeah, definitely. And so what you're gonna see in basically all these Necro decks is the way Necro works is that because you're using life total as a resource, you don't hold up interaction to defend yourselves when you tap out for it. You're gonna want to get Necro down on turn one. It becomes like basically it just gets like exponentially worse as the game progresses, unless you know the game's like kind of stalled out.
Exactly.
And
So
so
you build this
yeah,
as a mulligan machine, essentially. Back then,
yeah,
the only redundant copy of Necro you had was not Necro Dominance, but Beseech the Mirror. So in this
mhm,
original Necro Storm deck, it had 4 copies of Necropotence, 4 copies of Beseech the Mirror. It had Dark Ritual as your fast mana, but it also had a couple other cute little things it would do for fast mana, like Phyrexian Tower hitting a Ornithopter, or Haywire Might a Springleaf Drum, Ornithopter and a Springleaf Drum as well. There were just a couple of extra fast mana sources that you could play, and you did play them because you had to, and you were mulliganing to try and find a turn 1 or a turn 2 Necropotence. Because, like you said, it gets worse the longer the game goes on, and also your opponent can interact with you. If you're not actually slamming the thing on turn 1, it's very likely to get countered or thought seized.
yeah. And Necrostorm was called also like they had this kind of idea of you use your tendrils or your weather the storms to you don't have to win immediately the turn after you necro. You just have to kind of find ways to bridge with weather the storm or tendrils, and that'll let you kind of refuel up and set up for like a turn three win or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
this is
yeah.
something that's not always present in current Necro builds because we have a lot more tools. But 2 copies of the Weather the Storm in addition to 2 copies of Tendrils here. In other Storm decks, if you think about a format like Legacy, where fast mana is very, very plentiful, and you could, if Necropotence was legal there, you could Necropotence into like 4 Lotus Petals and have all the mana and colors that you really want. However, in Timeless, you, especially before we had cards like Chromox, you sometimes needed to actually like play out these mana dorks in the Springleaf Drum and your land drop and then pass the turn before you could actually get your Tendril skill. It wasn't mathematically reasonable to Necro for 19 and get a Tendrils kill every time. So frequently, this deck would play a couple copies of Weather the Storm. So on your turn 2, after you did your big Necro, you would like play out an Ornithopter, play out a Springleaf Drum, play out a Mishra's Bauble, all of these zeros. Then you'd cast Weather the Storm, you'd gain 15, 18 life, and then you can Necro for another 15 cards.
Yeah, and part of that was like you could just you generally use one dark ritual to get your first necro down, and then uh like say you go all in on this necro, and if you don't draw another copy of dark ritual, you don't have a way to cast any of your 4 drop like payoffs, right? So that was also another thing is you're just kind of limited. It's like sometimes you just don't draw dark ritual out of the next 19 cards, and that happens, and so it's kind of something you have to be careful of. So being a bit more patient and what was a much slower format and developing your mana made sense to not immediately kill yourself to necro by breaking on a ritual or something like that.
Yeah. And the deck actually did have like a lot of weird, silly, redundant other fast mana sources like backup fast mana, because we see we have Shambling Gas, we have Phyrexian Tower. All of these little mana sources do actually add up so that you're not consistently always drawing Dark Ritual and getting a crazy kill, but you are consistently going to draw some amount of junk to get you some amount of storm count and some amount of extra mana.
Yeah, definitely. And I played this deck quite a bit. It's still it was not nearly as consistent as the Necro list we have now, just because Beseech is just not nearly as powerful as like a as like some of the like as like running 8 Necros, or just having more access to like sacrifice. And so you would just mulligan and die like much more frequently than you are right now in today's timeless format.
Yeah, now this deck was a really good use of Necropotence, but it was an open question in the format back then. An open deck building question of, can I build a deck such that I slam Necro on turn one with a Dark Ritual and I draw 19 cards? Can I untap and win? More than half the time. And even for this deck, the answer was no. You often needed multiple turns to actually do your thing. So it was a very open deck building question in the format for like literal months, and it took until after Modern Horizons until somebody actually came up with like the first good solution to that question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's get to that. So after this, Modern Horizon 3 came out. Grief was legalized, as we like to say. Uh,
But most notably, Jet
and
Medallion and Chthonian Nightmare. Grief was only a one of in these original builds, and we still didn't have the card Sacrifice.
yeah, correct. Yeah, Sacrifice was not legal yet. Um, yeah, this is a bit of a newer build. But this is the same. Yeah, because it's been updated. But this is kind of the same idea though. Is that Jetstorm was a new idea that on top of using instead of using Beseech for its consistency, it was playing Tower with eight 1 mana dorks, um, and it would basically use that to get a Necro down on turn two, and then it also had was it 8 mana? Yeah, it had 8 mana one. Yeah, the dorks, and then it also had diabolic intent. And so what you
Yeah,
could do with diabolical, yeah. So that was another way it would basically increase the consistency of Necros is if you had like a turn one like Shambling Ghast, you would be able to cast Diabolical Intent, sacrifice the Shambling Ghast, and then if you had a Ritual or a Necro in your hand, you could tutor for the other half with Diabolical Intent. You get the treasure, and then you could Ritual out into Necro, and then you would have a lot of turn two Necros that way. And so this was another. This was basically like it had much more of a fair game plan. The Necrostorm definitely, and but again, you're going to see this continuous idea of Necro decks that are trying to figure out how can I get the Necro down as early and consistently as possible. And so the Necrostorm deck was Beseech, was their kind of big way to answer that question. With Jetstorm, it was Diabolic Intent, Phyrexian Tower, and 8 1 mana dorks.
yeah, and I feel like this also answered the other half of that deck building question pretty well. I feel like this was a lot more consistent at actually doing something once you actually necroed for a bunch of cards, because Jet Medallion would give you a crazy mana discount. This is almost another source of fast mana, similar to Dark Ritual. So you just had to draw a Dark Ritual and a bunch of stuff, or a Jet Medallion and a bunch of stuff, and then you immediately had action, and you might have had a game-winning line right there.
Yeah, yeah, and then you could always like tutor. You could always tutor for like the one of grief if you needed it. Yeah, just looping nightmare like a bunch of times with like a bowmasters was good enough a lot of the time. And yeah, and again, it was really good at using all the extra mana you had because you had either a bunch of 2 drops that you were casting for 1 mana with a medallion, or just a bunch of 1 drops. Just being able to like empty your hand after a necro and refuel like so. You burn a lot of your hand. Say you just burn 4 cards trying to like get your early necro down, and then you draw 7 cards. If you're able to cast like make a land drop and then cast like 5 of them, and then you get to like a necro again, and then do the exact same thing, you're just steamrolling them, right? So it was really also good. Both of these decks were really good at spilling out their entire hands after the necro turns, which was yeah really cool to see. Um, Notably, I think this probably has I would say this probably has like the worst like results out of it. I think I was probably one of the only people that like really piloted it. I think there was another player I think he went by Red on ladder if I remember correctly that you would see in like he would camp top 10ish, top 20ish with Jetstorm on ladder too. It was definitely like a lot more complicated. because you had so many tutors to work with, the way the tutors interacted with Necro. Notably, so when MH3 came out, Necro dominance was legal, right? But this deck, Jetstorm, could not use Necro dominance because its full combo was using the entirety of the graveyard, right? With Synthonia Nightmare and the Dorks and Apprentice and whatnot, right? So um, it was not able to run the 8 Necros, but it was able to run a bunch of DIs, Phyrexian Tower, 1 mana Dorks, uh, to kind of support and increase the consistency of the early Necropotence games.
Yeah, and even if it didn't like get a lot of adoption by ladder players, it was a deck that like kind of captured the public mind because a Tendrils of Agony Storm deck is something that we've heard of before, but this deck was doing something completely new involving new cards. It had somewhat of a fair beatdown plan built into it. At least the original versions had quite the fair beatdown plan, playing like 4 Bowmasters, so that it
Yeah,
felt a
4
bit more
Bowmasters, yeah.
approachable to other people. And it was interesting. It went viral. It was one of the cool decks after Modern Horizons that got a lot of acclaim.
Yeah, and it's really cool. Yeah, and there was and then we also with that same deck we tried to answer should I Necro for 19 every time I draw this, even though
Yeah, this
yeah, it
this
started
was
out I think it's yeah.
yeah, it was really like the best answer so far to like that question of how can I actually consistently win the game after I just say I play Necro turn 1, I Necro for 19. It wasn't perfect. No Necro deck is ever going to be perfect due to variance, but this was the best answer so far. And it was the first good answer, at least in my opinion, when I saw the list.
Yeah, and it kind of it like kind of established like a lot of the like or it helped me establish a lot of heuristics for Necro, like being able to cast Necro and then cast a tutor after you've Necroed, figure out all the cards that you're going to draw for Necro, and then kind of like match completing thing, just stuff like that. I think were really important to like understanding like, oh, how do I really abuse Necro? Oh, I have combos, and then I draw into them, and then I figure out what I'm missing, kind of thing, and like. And oh, and if I drew my full combo off of Necro because I see everything, I'm just gonna get the grief you in before I draw 7 more cards, right? And
Yeah.
it also kind of developed, yeah, like I think also, yeah, so if you couldn't draw 19 cards with it, unless like you had it maybe develop heuristics for um, if you like, because basically you could get replacement with diabolic intents and stuff like that. And so it was basically based on the amount of mana you had and like the amount of like creatures in play and medallions in play you had down. You could kind of figure out, oh, when am I supposed to like go for the combo turn when I really need to, kind of thing. And so yeah, it was really fun. A lot of the lines I spent a lot of time thinking about it. Yeah, I think this is kind of like this was pretty much the next iteration of Necro in the format for quite a long time. Again, so yeah, it used Diabolic Intent, Phyrexian Tower as its like answers to how do I get down to Necro early.
Yeah, and also me too, because like I never played the original Necrostorm deck. This was the first time that I had picked up Necropotence myself, and it was my on ramp into it. I didn't get very, very high rank with this deck ever because Necropotence is hard. These are some of the hardest, most skill testing decks in the format. And it is also exhausting to play the decks, like you say. There's a lot of front loaded decisions. Every Necro turn is like mentally taxing, where you feel tired after playing it, but at least for me, it has a nice spot in my memory as being where I learned to first play with Necro. And there's also the story of how the deck was created, which I'm surprised you didn't hint at because that's kind of your story. Humble guy here, Greaseball.
Yeah, so it was yeah, it's still a very very fond of my heart. It's we was basically this was like very early Korae Discord.
Yes,
Um
back when like I
there
didn't
were
really have a following, I was some random dude on YouTube who like made spiky videos and like min-max timeless, pretty much no following. The Discord had maybe a few dozen like really nerdy people in it way back
yeah,
when.
there were no deck threads, so everyone kind of just chatted in general, I think at this point. And
Yeah.
like kind of moved around depending on the day. Yeah, and then so I think yeah, Adam Goodman and I were brewing at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And we were trying some like bad breach lists with like green blue, and it was clearly shit. Then we were like looking at the medallions, and we realized there was basically no rituals in the format besides Dark Ritual. So we looked at all the black cards in the format. I think we finally paused on Synthonia Nightmare and said, okay, maybe that's something you can like do a bunch of times with like medallion. And then we found the one mana dorks, that like worked with it, and they were like, oh, well, you can just play Apprentice with it, and that kills through like One Ring and Leyline. So like, and that's already a really good card that you want with Nightmare. And like, oh, you just play Bowman, like, because Bowman's really good for 1 mana, like that's sick. And then like I had played Necro Storm a ton, so I was like, oh yeah, you definitely just jam Ritual and Necro in here. That those are the best cards in the deck, so we played that too. And yeah, and then like we started making a bunch of small changes here and there, but a lot of the core of the deck was just like kind of immediately figured out. And yeah, it was really cool. It was the top Necro deck in the format for quite a like for at least a couple months, I think. And yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, so
A
you
great time.
guys need to understand from my POV. I really didn't talk to Greaseball and Adam much before this because, it was a new Discord server. Most people were new faces. I
Oh
didn't know
yeah,
who they
yeah,
were. So, as from my POV, these two random people pinged me multiple times at 2 in the morning saying, you got to see this. And the thing I had to see was a literal 5 card combo in Timeless, which is ridiculous without context. However, it caught my attention because of that question I mentioned before. How do you build a deck so that you can Necro for 19 cards and mostly win the game on the other side? And this was like the best answer that I'd seen to it yet. Two random people invented it. I made videos on it, Grease made videos on it, and it was like the start of both of us having some sort of a following in Timeless. Like, obviously, I had my YouTube channel before that, but like, I had
I
posted
had
a
nothing.
couple of videos and like had just a couple of followers. It wasn't crazy. This is the first one of my videos where people were like, "Oh wow, this is cool, unique, interesting. This is crazy," and it drove a lot of engagement, a lot of new people, and then the growth started from there.
Yeah, and it was really cool playing. Like we didn't have like all of the play patterns that like, and we were punching a bunch.
Oh
This
yeah,
was probably the deck I think that you were most guilty of. Like you could just kill yourself in a single turn if you made a big misplay with this deck or you forgot one card of the combo or something. And it happened to me a million times. It happened to everyone else a million times. It happened a bunch. But I know when we were playing it that night at like 3 a.m. We didn't really fully understand the deck, but we were just backing into wins accidentally. And when you're piloting a deck and you don't really know what you're doing and it's still winning, you're like, okay, there is something here that's like, okay, let's just go ahead and ping Korae. It's probably sick,
yeah.
da da da.
You were
But
drawing 15
yeah,
cards a
yeah,
game, man. That's why you're winning the game. Like, you don't have
yeah,
to hard
that helps. That
combo.
helps a lot.
You were
Yeah,
drawing 15 cards. Some of them were Modern Horizons creatures and Orcish Bowmasters. You're going to win the game. And I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
playing it that next morning. Like, the fair beatdown won a significant amount of games as opposed to the hard combo until people learned what was going on.
But yeah, yeah, it was super cool. Yeah, I think like Mardu eventually adapted. It had a really fun matchup in the show and tell, but yeah, that's basically Jetstorm and kind of like the next continuation of Dark Ritual Necro decks in the history of Timeless.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, Jetstorm eventually did fall off because of a couple of reasons. It's very hard to pilot. After people learned what was up, it was really only so good. It dies to Graveyard Hate, it dies to a lot of interaction. It's a 5 card combo. The only people who really, really succeeded on it were like a handful of pilots. You can really count them on your fingers, right?
It's
So
probably two. It's
eventually,
probably two people because I looked. It's probably two people.
yeah,
Yeah.
most humble combo player. I'm one of 2 people who have ever played this deck well.
Yeah.
So
I
eventually,
wish more people played it, but yeah, here we are.
yeah, me too. It's such a cool deck. So eventually, a couple months later, this is going a little out of order, but it makes sense to mention these two texts together. Um, you
Yeah,
came up with a rebuild of Jetstorm.
yeah,
And the rebuild was really cool.
yeah.
It played Sorin Alenda, which is a recurring theme that you're going to see in Necro decks moving forward. Sorin is really cool because he's 3 mana, just like Necro, meaning you can cast him off of a Dark Ritual. Putting Alenda into play on turn 1 is just about as game winning as a Necropotence. Depends on what deck you're up against. Obviously, sometimes it's
Sometimes more
just going to
so.
get.
Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes it's just quicker and more straightforward. Sometimes
yeah.
it will
Because
die to
sometimes you
Sword
can necro.
Slashers.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you can Necro and you don't draw your Sornalinda, which is even worse, right? You
Yeah,
get
yeah,
all that out of the way if
exactly.
you just play.
You can Necro and Whiff, but this wasn't just a Necro plus Sword Alenda deck, this was Jetstorm. It had the Jetstorm combo in it. Now, notably, Jet Medallion is missing because Priest of Gix was the new way to do Storm. So two Priest of Gix plus Chthonian Nightmare was infinite Storm. It wasn't necessarily infinite mana, but it was infinite Storm and infinite energy. And then if you had a...
Wait, no, no, no. Two priests
Actually,
was infinite mana,
yeah, it
and
was.
yeah,
You're
two
right.
priests. Yeah, it was infinite mana. Yeah,
Yes, I'm thinking of Priest plus Shamlingast, or Priest
yeah.
plus
Okay.
Stitchers. So you would do infinite mana, infinite energy, infinite storm with your Priest, and then you would get a Stitcher supplier to mill your whole library. Since you have a bunch of energy for the Chthonian Nightmare, it can then reanimate Saint Elenda and reanimate Vein Ripper, which are also your Sorin cheat targets, Bane Ripper is taking the spot of Marionette Apprentice as your win condition for when you do your infinite loops. So this was a really cool like reimagination of the Jetstorm combo where you have that infinite graveyard combo involving Chthonian Nightmare loops, but you also have another Oops I Win button in addition to Necropotence.
Yeah, I will say notably, double priest was not infinite energy; it was infinite mana. And then if you had a priest with
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
with a 1 mana dork, then it was yeah. It was, but basically you could just back into a lot of infinites off the back with priest in Nightmare.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. And notably, I think this was like a lot more this was a lot more degenerate than the other Jetstorm builds because you're also playing Sorin and you're also on Chromox and notably also like I think like this was one of the stronger decks post Necro because if it stuck, you were basically casting 6 cards a turn off of it. If you weren't like yeah, you just like priest cycles for mana. All the 1 mana darks cycle for like net a mana off of like Phyrexian Tower. Uh, you have DIs like you had nightmares that would just go infinite. Like you could cast more like 5 or 6 spells a turn every time you necroed into this, and is really cool. I think I did that against someone where I basically just emptied my hand, and then I refilled, emptied my entire hand again. It was probably the best at doing that because it just had so many cards that ended up cycling for mana on their own. But yeah, it was super cool. Notably, okay, let's just kind of okay. We saw this. I think we'll go back to this for like a minute or two to kind of describe developments in the meta in response to it. But let's go to Black White Belcher.
Yeah, so this is
Anytime. Okay.
more chronological here. This popped up between
Yeah.
this Jetstorm rebuild and the original Jetstorm. And what we are looking at here is, oh, did you send me an old list without Chromox? Oh, that's cool. I was about to have to disclaim that the deck has changed a lot, but
Okay.
no,
Yeah.
this is the old
Oh no, there's a Chromox.
original.
There's a Chromox under Char Belcher.
It's hiding from me? Ah, hiding under
Yeah.
artifacts.
Yeah.
Okay, so the original
Yeah.
version of this deck did not have Chromox, it just had extra lands in this slot. So that is a
Hmm.
little bit of explosiveness that it was missing, but it had the same success because, of course, the whole format was a little bit slower before Chromox. The idea here is that we have yet another Oops I Win button in the deck. We have all 8 Necropotence effects. We have Sorin Alinda, and then we also have Goblin Charbelcher. And it's much easier to just win on the spot when you don't need your graveyard and you don't need to draw 5 specific cards off of Necro. You can just draw Goblin Charbelcher and enough fast mana and say, Oops, I win.
Yeah, and there's this so notably I think two of the really big things, well there's a lot of big things about this deck that were very different than the previous Necropiles. One is sacrifice. Okay, so sacrifice as fast mana.
Sacrifice.
This is the deck that out of all the decks that we're going to cover today lean the most into sacrifice with 8 elementals, with solitude and grief.
Yeah, I actually want to
And
mention Sacrifice and like how it
yeah,
came to be in the format. So this is an old card. It's been legal in Legacy probably since the format was created. And in formats with like plentiful free counter magic like that, Sacrifice is never something that you're going to want to do, even with a card like Grief that's legal into the format, because it's very possible to get blown out. But Timeless is in a unique situation where the free counter magic is not as plentiful. There are cards like Commandeer and Subtlety that we're going to mention pretty soon that enter the meta, but it's not as prevalent as Force of Will and Daze. So when you're on the play, you do have a lot of agency to do things with Sacrifice. So when Sacrifice first got added, my idea was kind of just to make a pile that would maximize Sacrifice. And I should have pulled these up in Discord before we started recording, but I had some original drafts that would just play, 4 Dark Rituals and then 4 Grief Sacrifice and a bunch of other random playoffs like Shieldred and the One
like
Ring because those are
One
4
Ring.
mana.
Yeah.
And that deck felt like actually like pretty good. It was like almost a precursor to Stompy, where I felt like I was always slamming either a Necro, a One Ring, or a Shieldred on turn 1 if I was willing to mulligan a little bit, and that felt really strong. And then I saw some random person on ladder playing the MDFCs in a similar deck, and I'm like, oh, you could add Belcher as one more version of this. So then I cobble together a version with MDFCs and Belchers, and then Tommy takes it from there. Tommy G21, who is a player who's taken out a couple tournaments with similar lists to this. And day one, he almost had this exact list, which is kind of crazy. Hammered out a sacrifice list that would really lean into having 8 sources of fast mana, soon to be 12 with Chrome Mox, and then having 16 different payoffs, which made it ridiculously consistent.
Yeah, and this was a yeah, this was a crazy deck. I remember I had the privilege of laddering with this before it was ever like published by Tommy. He shared it to me as a joke when I was playing some Magic. I thought it was a joke. I would like Necro for a bunch just to like kind of limit test it. I think I lost the first game and then I won like the next 13. Something that really became apparent is so it was the first deck to really leverage sacrifice really well, and it's still the best deck to do that. And then it also played. It was able to, because they're not using the graveyard, they're able to play 4 of Necro Dominance, which is also super big for your starts. And then you also had Sorin Alinda as your payoff, and then you also had Goblin Charbelcher outs, right? So you basically had 16 payoffs. Granted, one Sorin is conditional on Alinda, but like 12 like basically unconditional payoffs in deck was really sick. It also so there were like basically a lot of things that I learned through playing this deck, which like are very taken for granted now in this format. One of them is that okay, Sorin Elena on turn 1 just wins a lot. Like it was kind of thought of as like bullshit for a bit, or it was just like in these like white black mid range shells a bit, and they just had Sorin Elena starts, and it felt kind of bullshit. It's still a little bit bullshit, but it's I mean yeah, but it was enough to win like pretty much most of your games when you started out with it. Also, it's just anti-hate. In like Jetstorm and Necrostorm, you had to run like Besajus or Haywire Mites and stuff like that. You don't have to do that here. You just play Sorin Alinda. If they name the wrong thing with their flute, they name Necropotence with their flute or Goblin Charbelcher, you still have outs to Sorin Alinda and you can just blow it up. And sometimes you don't
Yeah.
even have to blow it up. You just make a 3/2 and you kill them because you're threatening 14 damage the next turn, right?
Hmm.
So that was really big.
Yeah, the
Uh,
classic I have Leyline of Sanctity, you cannot target me with Belcher, you cannot Tendrils of Agony me, I am invincible. And then Saint Alinda comes in. Oh, would you know, there's 4 different cards in the spellbook that you could draft with her, including enchantment removal for some reason, and it opens the way. Mirrors with this deck are also like super freaky and super fun to play through because you're playing 4
yeah.
Leyline in your mirror. So we're all just trying to like stick a Lenda to hit each other's sideboard cards, and every single mirror played like really goofy and really different. And I had so much fun with it.
Yeah, and then also you're because you have necropotent starts, but because you also like have these other starts that like so the previous issue in like Jetstorm and Necrostorm 2 is if your opponent named a flute, they play Disruptor Flute and they name Necropotence, you're like in a lot of trouble, right? Versus where like if they do it before you do anything, or they don't hold it, but like here you actually had like, oh, if I have a Necrodominance and a Necropotence in hand and it feels like they have a flute, I can just play Necrodominance and play through a flute. Or I can just have Alta Belcher. Like you basically had 4 different things, but or 12 different things between okay, 4 copies of 3 different things, right? Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, Goblin Charbelcher, and Necropotence that they could all name with flute. Or like actually, I think Pithing Needle was more popular at the time.
Yep, and this is
I
why
think because
flute
a lot of
became
people were trying.
popular. This is the
Right.
exact
Yeah.
reason,
So
because people would always
yeah.
ask me, what do I needle to beat your deck? And I would be like, how about you play flute and hold up 2 mana and wait for me to cast a card?
Yeah. So the previous 2 decks, you could blind Pithing Needle and name Necropotence and be pretty safe, and that was a good play. Um, With this deck, you could not do that. It was terrible. You just had a really good chance of missing. If you miss, you're just down a card, and they probably have something very, very threatening in play. They've either lended you, they've either Charbeltered you, or they're Necroing now. And so with that, yeah, a lot more people had to start playing Flute. Um, and yeah, so just like you just really saw the resilience of like playing multiple Flute targets instead of just playing the one. Or like multiple needle targets instead of just the one. And yeah, you kind of just got to see like Soren Alinda just being like really good anti-hate that you run main board that also just happens to win you the game on a percentage of your games was super, super good. And I think I hit rank 1 with this deck. I think I ended up finishing the season at like rank 2 because I just didn't feel I just stopped grinding at a certain point because things came up. But like the deck was very, very, very impressive. This deck also was probably I think this deck was more people picked up the second than Jetstorm. I know that for sure. I think it
Yeah,
was
but
very,
it
very
was
popular. It did
still,
really, really well.
yeah, like more people, but that's still not that many. It's very like mythic gated, this deck. Like you need your 4 copies of
Oh
Grief,
yeah,
4 copies of Agadeem's Awakening. Like who's crafting Agadeem's Awakening just to play like a random deck in Timeless? 4 copies of Necrodominance, which were never in the builds before. So it was tough to convince people to play the deck. It got a few more fans. Like this was the first Necro deck that I got a really high rank on. Like I had played Jetstorm, but for me that was very much a learning deck. I don't think I ever camped high rank with that. But this deck, I took it to single digit ranks. I can't remember the exact highest number I got with it, but this was like the first time where I sat down and I said, all right, I'm going to grind 100 plus games of Necropotence combo and see where it takes me in life.
Yeah, and a few more cool things that it had was you realize like back with the old show and tell builds, Saint Olinda coming into play and Witch Enchanter coming into play were actually like actually very threatening because there was no
Yeah,
waterlog teachings redundancy and they had to have the Born at some point. So you could actually win games off of that. Also, Belcher coming into play with 3 mana up, or you like ritual in response and play your Belcher. They didn't have a lot of ways to win through that either without the Born.
exactly.
So there were yeah, so it had a lot of counterplay to show and tell. This was actually the deck that pushed Novos and the show and tell Hive Mind to play 4 of Commandeer in the sideboard, and that is like a very very big development. I think for a while I joked about blue decks should just run Commandeer if they're tired of getting turn one Necroed. They never did. There wasn't enough like meta share for it to make sense. Well, Jetstorm was popular with Black White Belcher. It was popular enough. Enough grinders were playing it. They were playing games really quickly because the matches lasted like I think I averaged like 7 or 8 minutes a match, and so they were like appeared more frequently than they should have because they're grinding so many games. And yeah, this pushed 4 Commandeer to the meta, and that's a very big shift, and that like has basically stayed in the meta until today. Like it's still very apparent today. I think if you looked at the blue list, Show and Tell and Cope both have four Commandeers or 3 Commandeers. It's yeah,
Yeah,
it's a mainstay now.
but it also affected the main deck of Show and Tell. It pushed them to have the instant speed win because of Witch Enchanter and Saint Alinda. It was the combination of this deck and energy in the meta that could both answer a Show and Tell. For example, they cast Show and Tell, I put Saint Alinda into play, draft my enchantment, removal, blow it up. Energy can do that too with Static Prison, but the Show and Tell deck was able to play around that a bit more easily because you could have like an Abrupt Decay in your hand to blow up the Static Prison. But something like Witch Enchanter is an ETB trigger, which is a lot more difficult to deal with. So you actually do want to win at instant speed and response to it. Same with Goblin Char Belcher activation. So Show and Tell actually did have to play the one of Born Upon a Wind, which eventually became 4 of Waterlog Teachings. They stopped playing like their silly win condition where they get Approach of the Second Sun out of the sideboard and moved their deck forward and made a couple main deck building concessions.
Yeah, and now it never loses to Witch Enchanter, Static Prison.
Yeah, it's so
Basically never loses.
crazy because like a year ago I could play energy and hold a static prison in my hand and I'm like, man, I'm good to go. And nowadays, no, it's a joke card. You can like almost board it out in your show and tell matchups. I don't board at
It's
all
so
for rare
bad. Yeah, it's
copies,
so
but
bad
yeah.
now. Yeah,
It's still
and then I
good to have.
know. Yeah,
Don't, by the way, people are gonna listen. Don't get it twisted. Don't board out all your static prisons. You could static prison the Mox. You could static prison like an Atraxa if they do like that kind of show and tell. Don't take them all
yeah.
out.
Our name are cool.
It's still
Yeah,
good, but it's not a free win.
yeah, and then so notably with this development of Commandeer, developed specifically by Show and Tell to beat Black White Belcher, there was this sideboard tech of running Unstoppable Slasher against. Yeah, so there's Commandeer. Yeah, and then so because it only targets non-creatures, we like basically came up with anti-Commandeer tech post board so that you could Dark Ritual into Unstoppable Slash. You know, they don't want to commandeer the Dark Ritual. They want to get your Necro or whatever you have, right? And get their like 2 for 3 or whatever it is. But you just play an Unstoppable Slasher, which they can't interact with, and it is now with a return clock. And so that was like the whole idea of the sideboard, the Unstoppable Slasher tech.
Yeah, and for a lot of
So
this
yeah,
time, Show and Tell was Sultai. Bant Show and Tell eventually became a thing in Timeless and was able to answer this with the Swords to Plowshares, but Sultai Show and Tell can't answer this. Even an Abrupt Decay just buys 2 turns. And that was the old Sultai Show and Tell with like Rakshasha's Bargain and like that really greedy deck building.
assemble the teams.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And this card would clock them in 3 turns. It was funny to see.
it was very sad. Yeah, it was very satisfying when it did work. Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, so with that, so that was very present in the meta for a long, long time, and it was still like brought to tournaments like still like it's still like a meta call sometimes. I think like pre like Muxus deck getting popularized
Yeah,
as
it was
like the like
definitely a
yeah,
meta call. Like it won tournaments. It wasn't a joke deck. Tommy won a tournament with it. I got a top 8 at a tournament with it, if I'm remembering correctly. Like there was some meta where I'm like, I don't want to play energy. I need to play something that's really fast, and I top 8'd with this. It was a great meta call, like up until we got Strip Mine. Pretty much, Strip Mine really, really hurts a Belcher game plan because your lands are all painful in your Necropotence deck. When you stumble after a Strip Mine, it hurts a lot more in this deck, unfortunately.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, and then okay, yeah, so I want to jump back to like Sorin Storm, like Jetstorm 2 a bit. Yeah, so notably, this deck was popular for about a week. So like a couple months after that, we're messing around, build a deck. It's probably popular for about a week. Um, I think Korae and I both get like top five, top four, like top five ish.
Yeah,
I think I got top four. You got top 10, whatever. It's like top 10 Mythic
whatever.
ladder. We
Yeah,
both
we
got it,
both at the
and
same
like
time too. It's like you're rank 4,
yeah,
I'm rank 6 simultaneously with this deck,
yeah, and
and
it was
everybody's
fast. It played very
yeah.
quickly,
And then like
and
the community reactions like new Necro deck. But unfortunately, this fell off a cliff a lot quicker than the other decks because it is hateable. You can play Graveyard Hate, and once Graveyard Hate does hit the battlefield, you can play through it with a Sorin Alunda, but this doesn't have the absolute density of things to do that the other decks have. This just has Necropotence and Sorin, which is only 8 crazy busted payoffs. Whereas Black White Belcher that we were just looking at had the 16, and why we were singing praises of this deck.
yeah, and I will say, well, yeah. So also looking at this deck, so like I think I released the deck guide on a Monday, and I think the literally the next day, Tuesday, Chester and Novos in that group, basically all the blue mages got together and developed a deck called Esper Tempo, which not only had 4 Commandeer in the sideboard, it also had 4 Subtlety in the main and 4 Flare of Denial in the main. And that was kind of, I think that kind of set the mark for a lot of the tempo shells going off a lure. Like they would just have a sideboard lures for like certain matchups, and they wouldn't play it in the main. They would have it turned off in the main deck, so that they could run 4 Subtlety and deal with like turn 1 Sorins and stuff like that. And this also kind of set like the foundation. Like if you look at the blue tempo list today, they're running Subtlety, they're running Flare of Denial. It kind of set up all that like free interaction suite of blue that they're continuing to use to this day, and probably they're gonna probably just keep using it until Force of Negation comes out, and then they'll do some recalibrating and stuff. But yeah, I would say this deck kind of prompted the use of the 4 Subtlety, 4 Flare strategies.
Yeah, it's what shoved us into the current meta alongside Belcher because for the longest time, especially when show and tell was less popular on ladder, because people would only bring that deck to tournaments and metagame challenges, there's 3 things you run into on ladder. There's energy, there's the blue decks, and then there's this, right? And this deck was the one that was demanding to be interacted with, so energy came through, brought the interaction for this, and same thing, the blue players. Start of our wonderful feud, the Necro heads versus the blue players.
Oh yeah, no, I remember. I think like a day after this guide came, or I bumped into Novos on ladder. Right, I'm on the play. I go, I'm the Necro player. This is sick for me. I'm having a great time. I turn one Necro and I go, oh, he has Commandeers on the board. I'm gonna take my game 1. Thank you very much. He flashes. He plays out his Subtlety, sacks it to Flare of Denial, counters my turn 1 Necro. I proceed to lose the game,
It's what
and
you
I was just
deserve.
yeah, I was so but I mean that set up the whole interaction suite of Subtlety and Flare of Denial
Exactly.
for blue.
Oh my god, degenerate Greek player gets what they deserve for once.
Yeah,
We don't
yeah, yeah,
actually hate the blue mages, guys. We're gonna have Chess here on next episode, and we're gonna
yeah,
talk about
yeah, no, yeah,
Ponder. That's a little
yeah,
teaser. It's all in
yeah.
good
But it was
fun when
very
we
much
say that we're rivals. We are always counter
yeah.
decking each other, which is fun and interesting.
Yeah, but it was very much like shocked Pikachu, whenever me spending 2 cards to get a Necro down and they spend 3 cards to counter it, and I'm like, it's just like, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, and then like the
Uh,
rest of your hand is just like a bunch of junk that does absolutely nothing until you draw 15 cards.
yeah, it was a mulligan simulator. Yeah, not close. Yeah, so and they would just draw out of it better than I had. They'd eventually cruise, they eventually brainstorm, whatever. They had a lot more selection in blue, and they were able to pull out like they're basically, oh, I can just trade a bunch of resources, just match and basically just float until I bridge to my mana drain or my treasure cruise or whatever I need to get going. Right. But yeah, so that I think notably this is like right before Esper Tempo came out.
Yeah, and like that's like you said, it's what let Esper Tempo be what it could be because it's hard to build fair blue in this format. It's very hard. And when everybody on ladder is playing energy and the other degenerate deck is easy to target with free counter magic, it's hard to call it easy to target, but when you have a very solid plan against them, you can tech your fair blue deck for those 2 specific matchups, and you can have a winning record in both of them simultaneously if people are only playing 2 decks.
Yeah, and then yeah, notably my decision to use Sorin Alinda was just again borrowed from Belcher and just realizing how good having Sorin Alinda in your main deck with Dark Ritual does and how what it does for your anti hate. for free. And yeah,
It's a sweet alt win con too, because Chthonian Nightmare just like rebuying Elenda over and over again gives you like
yeah,
infinite life
with
and
like Bane
infinite
Ripper.
cards out of the spell book, which is cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, it's very cool. Okay, so now
Now
that
we're on to the
let's see, that
present
gets us,
day, right?
yeah,
So
Soren's
Black
the
White
real Soren
Belcher,
Storm. Yeah.
yeah, Black White Belcher dies, or at least strip mine happens. I declare the deck dead. But at the same time, Muxus happened to be working on his own pile, which the first time I saw it, I made comparisons to both the original Necrostorm and to Belcher. And I got a couple things wrong. I looked at this and I said, there's less density of payoffs than Black White Belcher, and it's harder to win on the spot than by putting Belcher in your deck. Why wouldn't you just build the deck like that? And if you really wanted to build a Storm deck, where are your Weather the Storms and redundant pieces that are really helping you put together the Storm win? It feels like you made Storm worse by putting 8 copies total of Sorin plus Elenda into it, and you made Belcher worse by taking out Belcher for a Storm win condition. But Muxus
And you
kept
made Necrostorm, yeah, and you made Necrostorm worse by having less artifacts and enchantments to sack to beseech the mirror, right?
Yeah, that was the one problem I had. This thing is pretty low on like beseech fodder. I think there's only 15 cards max that can be sacrificed to it, which seems like
That's,
way too few.
oh, I think it's, wait, it's, is it 11? I thought it was the three to four ley lines, Moxes, and the artifact lands, right?
Yeah, so it's 11 if you don't count your necros actually. So if you have a
Okay,
necro
yeah,
in
yeah.
play, you could technically sack it. But yeah, it was way too low. It seemed to run against a lot of like deck building philosophy.
Yeah, no, definitely
And
established that like it ran against precedent for Necro decks like quite a bit. Yeah,
yeah,
in terms of
and
yeah,
it's
fodder
always
for
why I
beseech and fodder for sacrifice. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's why I appreciate whenever we get like a new voice in the format, someone who actually goes against what's established or somebody who's new to the format, but they played like Legacy Storm or whatever before this. They look at the card pool with a completely fresh eyes and they realize like what can happen. And this deck is it's hard to pilot. I picked it up. I gave it a month ago whenever like Muxus started first putting up results, probably a month and a half ago at this point. I picked it up. I did good with it, but not great. Like with a Necro deck like this, when ladder isn't ready for it, you would expect to do great. You would expect to put up a crazy win percentage. You would expect to have easy wins. And it didn't feel too easy to me. Like I was pretty frequently getting into positions where I'm like, oh, I can tendrils for like 7 or 8 storm count, but I need 9 or 10 to kill my opponent. And I felt like I was constantly falling just short. I felt like I was relying on Sorin Elenda too much. And at least for me, like I just needed to break the biases that I had coming from other Necro decks. And I needed to just not play it for a couple weeks. Metagame challenge rolled around. I saw Muxus streaming it in voice chat. He was doing well. I'm like, well, I was planning on playing Belcher for the weekend as a dark horse, but tried it like right before the metagame challenge on ladder, and it still felt horrible in the strip mine. So I'm like, okay, let's try the Muxus deck. And I got a 7-0 on the first shot because I'm looking at it with fresh eyes. So the play patterns are coming to me, and I'm nice and rested too. So I'm realizing all these cool new play patterns. Muxus is in the voice chat helping me as well. I'm figuring out these really cool and obscure storm lines where I'm able to just like do a couple little tricks to just barely get that 1 or 2 extra storm count to win. And I'm not the only person who had success with it in the metagame challenge weekend, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I think like because there are so many different things that with sacrifice only having griefs to hit, I think we'd only seen in like degenerate spy decks, which like were kind of just thought of as like gamba machines that that weren't like super solid and like just didn't do as well in best of three, and with lack of material for beseech that like went against precedent. Because I know Omnithopter and Spotlight, they were very particular about when they were, oh, you have beseech, you want about 16 targets, you know, if you're building this, or like
Yeah.
Green Black Belcher, and we had like built with that in mind quite a bit. And this kind of challenged that, and kind of abused the London Mulligan a lot more. Notably, this deck, you know, so like the Belcher deck had Sacrifice, 8 Necro, Sorin Linda. Um, this deck, you know, had Sacrifice, 8 Necro, Sorin Linda, and Beseech. So it is kind of combining all the ways outside, you know, like a lot of the ways from previous lists of just increasing the odds of a turn 1 Necro. And I think notably, like we did challenge it because this did kind of look piley. I think in particular, and I think it's 4 Leyline Sanctity is what he's been trying lately. But you just kind of look at this list; it goes against some precedents. You see three ley lines instead of 4. It looks a little troll. It looks a little sketchy, and you know you kind of challenge it a bit. Just in terms of like deck, just looking at a deck and like seeing the cards. And yeah, I think he put in like 20, 30 hours on it, averaged like 77, 80% win rate, somewhere around that ballpark. And it was like, all right, here's my untapped stats. They're all here. It's all logged. Yeah, and like yeah, and it's cool. And we got to see that. I would say let's see what else. And then we were like, and then we kind of had this debate of like, okay, well, is this more consistent than Black White Belcher? Right? And
Yeah.
so if you want to get in and have this conversation of figuring out like like developing so consistently like we basically like went through calcs and stuff like that.
Yeah, so
And you
there's
can
a
do this.
lot
Yeah.
of different ways to like kind of slice up how the deck is consistent. So one of the things Muxus is really maximizing when he designed this list is the ability to like hard mulligan to a Necro. One of the things he does that if we were to do the math, which we'll talk about in a little bit, he's running extra black sources compared to something like Jetstorm or Black White Belcher, untapped black sources for turn one, in addition to running the same fast mana package, which gives him, let's say, a 1-2% more chance of getting it per mulligan. I don't know if that's the exact number off the top
Or
of my
like
head.
per like stretch of mulligans, right?
Yeah, but if you, yeah, add that
Yeah.
up over several mulligans, and it gives him more ability to hard mulligan for Necro. And a lot of the Black White Belcher deck building was built so that you could have consistent things to do on turn two, turn three, consistent things to do through hate, turn one winning lines. So Muxus's intuition was that his deck is better because he can hard mold a Necro more. My intuition was that Black White Belcher is better because it had more winning lines and it would be more consistent once you actually stuck the Necro. Now, when you have a calculation like that, it is too hard to do in like an actual calculator. No matter like how you try to do the math, the complexity of that gets way too crazy because you have to consider, oh, I have a Chromox, so I need a black pitch in my hand. I also need a Grief. I need a black pitch for that. It has to be two separate black pitches. Both of those black pitches need to not be used in my combo. And the math starts to get really, really funky. So the way to work around that is actually like write some code. The only good
Yeah.
way to do that that we know is to like do a Monte Carlo simulation, which if you guys don't know, that is smart people talk for we are going to brute force the simulation 1 million times. You're going to write a bunch of code that will simulate a 60 card magic deck. It will draw 7 cards off the top. It will look at the hand, evaluate it based on what I say. It will tell me yes or no if this is good, and it's just going to draw a new 7, and it's going to draw a new 7, and it's going to do that 1 million times and give me the output. So I'm a programmer for a living, and I have like the modern AI programming tools. So one day I just talked to Claude Code, and I'm like, all right, Claude, buddy old pal, I need a Monte Carlo simulation for looking at this deck. I have to win a Discord argument. I need the sim.
Right. Right. That's big.
So through some amount of vibe coding, some amount of guiding it. Obviously, it's not pure vibe coding. Like I did have to give it like a lot of structure and direction because I wanted it to do specific things, such as it needs to do the pitches for Chromox and Grief. It needs to be able to check the hand. Card can only be used for one thing, but card can have multiple properties, right? Because a Dark Ritual is usually used as fast mana, but it could also be your Chrome Mox pitch. You can't code it so that a card only does one thing. So I code it so that cards can do multiple things. I code it so that it checks the hand forward and back. What's it called? Check
Yeah.
backtracking
Like
algorithm, so that it checks it in all
yeah.
possible permutations to make sure that everything is checked. And
Yeah, so
after
for
iter,
example, like if you're let me yeah, so just like kind of fill you on a bit because but yeah, but it's basically like okay, you have a Chromox. Okay, well, it's good for the Chromox lines, but you can't pitch it to Grief. Leyline and Sanctity, it's good for your Beseech lines, but you can't pitch it to Grief. You don't want to pitch it to Chromox because it doesn't get your black source. Just stuff like that. That's all like implemented into his program he made. It's really cool. It's really really cool, and it like yeah, it's a great
yeah,
program.
and you can just tell it, okay, go simulate 1 million things, and you can just manually tell it like what scenarios and things you're looking for. You can manipulate and modify the deck however you want. I remember doing the calculations for both this deck and for Jetstorm or for Black White Belcher for fun. So these here are the outputs of that program for Black White Belcher. The actual output is like a giant JSON file that cannot show on the screen very easily. But for people who are just listening to the podcast, I did get the cumulative probabilities of mulliganing to a payoff in Black White Belcher if you are like truly willing to mulligan down to 3. So you can see up top here, we have it per number of cards in hand. So 36.5% of 7-card hands do have a turn 1 Necropotence, a turn 1 Sorin, or a turn 1 Belcher. For keeping 6-card hands, it's 36.37%, just a tiny percent smaller because there are some like very specific sevens involving like multiple dark rituals and a demonic tutor that will allow you to like set up a Sorin on turn 1, where you could do it on 6 but not on 7. Same thing. Go to 5, it's 33%. Go to 4, it's 23%. Go to 3, it's 17.9%. And that is because pretty much your only outs are like exactly Black Source, Dark Ritual, Necropotence,
Black Source,
which
yeah, yeah.
18% almost is still a lot for that. So if you add up the cumulative probability, assuming you're starting at 7 cards and you want to go all the way down to 3 or effectively 0, but you're not going to want to go down to 0, is 83.12%, which is pretty good for Black White Belcher to have a turn 1 payoff. And like I said before, Black White Belcher is also built to be like resilient to sideboard hate. It's built to do things on turn 2, like casting a Belcher or a Necro on turn 2 are very legitimate plays that deck can make, and those are plays that win games frequently. So I was really pleased to
Yeah,
see this.
yeah, and you're feeling good. You're feeling good after this, right? You see 83.12%. All right, that's sick. I'm probably gonna win this Discord argument, surely, right?
Yeah, but then it was you who took the program and did all the Muxus
Yeah,
calculations because you had played the deck a bunch and you knew all the scenarios. And this is one of the screenshots you sent me. So it looks like we're seeing a 36.19% chance of actually hitting it per mulligan. I think this is on
yeah,
a 7-card
for
hand.
for for seven cards, yeah. So
So that's a
I think I
smidge
actually,
slower than
yeah,
Black White Belcher, actually, which we just complimented Muxus and said his deck is really good at hard mulling to Necro. 36.19 is slightly less than 36.5%. So it's true that his sevens are a bit worse than ours, because ours meaning Black White Belcher. Sorry, I'm taking my side
yours,
of the
yours,
argument
yours,
here.
Tommy. Yeah, I'm out of the. Okay.
Me and the argument here. I'm like, okay, Muxus is point few percent worse than Black White Belcher. It means I win this
Mhm.
argument. However, Black White Belcher's odds fall off significantly once you get to 5, 4, and 3 card hands. It goes from 36 to
Because of
33 to
sacrifice.
23. Yeah, because it needs sacrifice lines and a
Because
couple
for
of other
sacrifice,
things.
you need 5 cards. You need 5 cards for all your sacrifice lines because you need, right. You need uh pitch card, or so elemental, pitch card, sacrifice. That's your mana, and then you need untapped black and your payoff, right? So you need 5 card combos for all that. So it starts to basically start converging at 5, and then it falls off a cliff at 5. Because a lot of your redundancy is coming from, or like a good amount of your redundancy in comparison, more is coming from sacrifice, and so
Yeah,
that starts dropping off a cliff at 4 and 3 card keeps.
exactly. So Muxus's deck essentially has a lot more viable 4 and 3 card hands, bringing his overall turn 1 Necro probability a lot higher than Black White Belcher. And what's really
Yeah,
crazy
it's
about his deck is I think you did some of the math for this. There are like theoretical keepable 2 card hands. If you get a 3 card hand that's absolute garbage, you could mold it too and say, I'm going to keep Necropotence, Dark Ritual, and hope I rip a land off the top. And that is a reasonable course of action you could take.
for the deck. Yeah, and I will say I think it came out to 83.52% compared to Belcher. So it was a little bit ahead. But it was just interesting seeing that the 5 to 7 card mulligans were better for Belcher, and then once you got off that, basically the Muxus deck, Sorin Storm, started gaining all of its ground back. And so a big part of that is if you think about the limitations of Belcher deck. Right now there are only 3 different copies of Black MDFCs: Academy's Awakening, Boggart Trawler, and Fell the Profane. You also, Chromox was a really big add to that deck because it's basically 4 more black sources that are on paper, right? Even though it takes an extra card.
Yeah.
Muxus is, I think, plays around like 20-ish black sources
Yeah,
or
it's a
something like
lot more.
that.
He has 17 straight up lands, including his
Yeah.
MDFCs plus the artifacts. So that's much more than
Okay.
the 12 plus 4. It's 17 plus 4. That's a huge difference.
Right. Yeah. And so if you look at, if you like, and in your most important combination every single time is Dark Ritual, Untapped Black Source, and Necro, because it's a 3 card combination. So you're more likely to have it because it's only 3 cards, and then you get to see it in all your mulligans down to 3. So it basically like dominates a lot of your calculations, and you can actually see if you go to like Belcher, their 3 card combo, or go to Belcher real quick just
Yeah.
to kind of show. So for 3 cards, Belcher has about like 17.97% chance of opening with basically Dark Ritual, Necro, Untapped Black. Whereas
Yeah, it's this
the
top
Muxus deck,
scenario here. It's 21% for the Muxus deck, and this
21.42%.
21%
Yeah.
scenario can happen in all hand sizes down to 3.
Yeah, and just to show how much this scenario like dominates, the next highest scenario at 7.9%. Um, Guess what? It involves Dark Ritual, Necro, and instead of your black source, you have a Chrome Mox and a Black Pitch. So
Yeah.
it clearly just dominates all your calculations. Um, Having 8 Necro is a really big deal, and basically it's just kind of showing that by having I think it usually comes out to like I think per mulligan for every black source you add with 8 Necros, it's about 0.8% chance to more to open up with that combo. And so that's kind of it's just taking advantage of a lot more black sources, which is really cool.
Yeah, and Belcher absolutely couldn't budge on that, of course, because of like the literal cards existing, but also just
Yeah,
because like there's
Belcher.
a really tight deck building constraint because you're playing white cards as well. You're also trying to support Solitude. So if theoretically if they print more black MDFCs, Belcher would probably have to get off of Solitude at that point to adopt them, which would cause them percentage points elsewhere. So
Yeah,
this deck's
right.
building it's a bit more spread being in two colors.
Yeah, and this is and so just like kind of always understanding that these like dark ritual like necro starts are like how likely they are. There's a lot of people that and I've never been one to complain about this because I'm very I play these decks. The dark the grief necro starts always feel really painful because it's like you're just down your best card and then you got grief and then they just drew 7. But they're just like they're not nearly as likely as the other scenarios, and they basically never get to keep hands around grief. They have to keep hands around like getting their payoff. They're not nearly as likely. They feel incredibly bad when they do happen, but they're not because their deck is forced to mulligan simulator in the first place. They're not. It's not a large like range of probabilities, and so that's why like when something like force of negation is going to come out, you're not going to be able to grief it that frequently because you have to have the 3 cards that you want, like at least Dark Ritual, Necro, and Untapped Black, and that's like, and then you also have to have grief in a pitch bowl, right? So like it's not going to happen nearly as much, and it actually is going to be like force of negation is going to be really good against these kinds of decks because they're already mulliganing and they're not going to consistently have the grief.
Yeah, and that's like a mulligan mentality thing that I don't think we explained super explicitly today on the podcast. Like, when you're playing these decks, if you want to win the game, you must mulligan to a hand that does something. You should not ever, ever keep a fair seven. If you open a 7 card hand and it's 3 basic swamps, a Necropotence, a Grief, and a black card for the Griefs, you can grief your opponent on turn 1 and play a Necro on turn 3. That is not a keepable hand. And
Yeah.
even if it just has Sorin on turn 3, not keepable, unless it's a really like Mickey Mouse matchup, like you're against like Red Stompy and you know that a turn 3 Sorin will beat them on the play or something like that. If you just have a fair hand that just has Grief and Boggart Trawler and a Demonic Tutor, then you need to send that hand back. And you're only keeping something like that if you're on 4 cards and you have no other choice.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also you kind of have to notice the discrepancy too. Is like you do make back all your card. Like if you land the Necro, all the other cards that you mulligan away, they don't really matter. It's just 1 life. It's just you're just basically paying a life per mulligan. If you're mulliganing to Necro, which is like a very big deal, and it's like the best card to like Necro's the best card to like buy you out of mulligans basically. And so that's I think these it's why these types of decks are like the biggest abusers of London Mulligan in the format by like quite a bit. Um, Show and tell never mulligans down to 5, like unless it's like a really bad like they don't if they do it, it's like a bad day, something bad kind of happened. This deck mulligans the 3 and it's business as usual.
Yeah, show and tell deck building's gotten really interesting since they've gotten Ponder. Like you don't see them mulliganing very much at all anymore because they have the 8 cantrips and stock up and whatever tutors they want to run to sculpt their hand. So they're just keeping a hand just like you're playing limited, where you have a balance of lands and spells. Your hand does something. Obviously, there's junk hands that deck could have. If you have like Omniscience, Atraxa, and 4 lands, you don't want to keep that. But as long as you have some sort of cantrip or filtering, you can keep your hand, you could brainstorm away your bad cards. This deck doesn't get afforded that possibility.
Yeah, and notably, especially for show and tells that like are running Commandeer, opposition agent has like we've moved from this unstoppable slasher, kind of like chopped like quirky tech
That was
to
so
opposition
chopped.
agent. Yeah, to opposition agent which is a much bigger threat against show and tell, I would say, especially with the teachings lines now.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that Show and Tell is going to sideboard out like their Abrupt Decay style removal against us because it has no targets in the deck other than the sideboard opposition agents, which may or may not actually exist and may or may not actually be played. So it's a really cool card that you get to run for some free win percentage. It won't work as much in a tournament, your opponent will know. But on ladder, you could steal so many games with that card.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, so that's like the history of like Dark Ritual Necro and kind of like progression of it throughout the history of Timeless. Which I
Yeah.
think we've been here for pretty much all of outside of the Necrostorm when it like first came out.
Yeah, these decks are awesome, and like I had never played combo decks like this before Timeless, and I have so much fun jamming all of them. And it's one of the things that's helped my channel stick out, being able to cover like the combo decks like Jetstorm and Black White Belcher, and not totally punt. Though it's always hard to play while recording. I always make 27 different mistakes and get an essay from Tommy in my DMs. I remember the first time I did a Belcher video, Tommy gave me a very nice constructive essay on like I was
Oh my god.
necroing too aggressively because I was still
Yeah.
learning the deck because it was still pretty new. It was welcomed and asked for, but like hey, I love waking up to walls of text, man. And I love the Necro players because like they will post walls of text. Like to win a Discord argument against Muxus, like I wrote a giant Python program and like ran it a bunch of times and kept finding things wrong with it to fix, and then I still lost my Discord argument. That's how we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Yeah. But it did validate your feelings for it
Oh
feeling better
yeah,
on the moles
that
to
was so
5, right?
cool. That was actually so cool. The fact that it validated both of our feelings. His deck's better at hard mulling to Necro. My deck is better at keeping 6, 7 card hands. Everybody's happy. Yay.
Yeah. Yeah. So Muxus was just playing his own deck, just minding his own business. Korae wrote a program, ran simulations on the program, debugged the program, came back and said, actually we're both kind of right.
Yeah, all because I had a skill issue playing his deck and I just needed more practice on it.
Yeah. Uh, but yeah, that's fun. I mean, that's what Thomas is for, right? Just get into an argument, do
That's
some
why I
math.
love this format. I love the Discord
Yeah.
too.
Good. Yeah, and it's definitely one of the like no one else gets to play 4x Necropotence, so it like you were kind of on our own figuring out a lot of this stuff and like kind of developing a lot of these like heuristics around it. And so it's really been cool to see how that plays. And
Yeah,
like even
absolutely.
in this deck, yeah, even in this deck, like you have like you still have your demonic tutor, and if you're missing Sorin Alinda, you can still do the necro trick where you necro for a couple. Oh, you demonic tutor. Oh, did I draw the Sorin or Alinda? Okay, well I'll get the other half, then I have it next turn. So there's like a lot of cool stuff that is this and ideas that have continued on from the past from like the history of Necropotence, which is really cool.
Yeah, and what you mentioned on about us being on our own is like a really good point. These original Necro decks, they did try to like draw their inspiration from traditional Storm lists in other formats, but like once Jetstorm became a thing and it became the Necro deck to like the most popular one, like this is just radically different from anything else we've seen in other formats. It's just a radical departure. Sorin Alenda gets added to it. It's another angle that's never going to be in another format. We are completely on an island trying to figure this stuff out, and it's always cool when we get new players and new ideas coming through, even if they happen seemingly randomly. It's always fun when there's innovation.
Yeah,
And it's tough
definitely.
because
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
legitimately unique innovation. It's it's not as much of a rehashing of old ideas as other decks in Magic. Like when I build Mardu Energy or whatever, yeah, it's just because I have so many reps playing fair Magic, both in Timeless and off of Timeless, and I understand matchup dynamics, and everything is by the book, even if we're making a new version of Energy. But like with this, it is drawing on the very limited book of Timeless Necro decks that I think we condensed down into about an hour and 15 minutes here.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm sure we'll be just as excited next week when we talk about tempo with Chester. And this was kind of an ode to Dark Ritual Necro and the like. And we've kind of realized that we might appear a bit biased towards certain decks in the format, as as people might be. And so we are going to try and have Chester on and kind of right that ship and go a bit the other direction for a week at least.
I'm gonna like groan the whole time, but sure, yeah, we can have him on if you really want to have him on.
Yeah. When he's talking about like, comedy, be like, yeah, but that's not really cool to play that card.
All right.
Any closing thoughts?
No, I already sang my praises of like how cool and unique this format is, and again, shout out to like the Discord. Everybody's in there, even if I didn't mention your name today. Like every single person who has contributed to these Necro decks at some point, you're all awesome. You're like literally trailblazing in a way that you don't get to do in other Magic formats because everything else is so similar. But in Timeless, we have the ability to make these crazy Necropotence piles.
Yeah, definitely. And like I mean, because also Sorin Alinda's not even in other formats, right? Because Alinda is an alchemy foo card, right?
Yeah, it's a
That no one plays with.
made up arena gamer card. Soren got banned in paper formats too because it's so good. Like Soren plus Vein Ripper is too good for Pioneer, right? Like it's a very powerful thing, and if there was a more powerful payoff in paper, it would be played in paper.
Yeah. Yeah. So super excited. Thank you everyone for listening. Yeah. Have a great week in Timeless. Yeah.